Okay, so you should get a little icon, check yes. And then we'll be posting it on our website. If there is need, we'll do this again in the future. But right now it seemed like everybody was desperate for information, understandably. And so we wanted to kind of offer this. Okay, so a few things to just lay out fundamentally, the difference between HIAS Inc. and HIAS Pennsylvania. HIAS Inc. is a national organization. It was founded in 1841 in New York. Please make sure that you're muted. We'll unmute you when it's time for questions. Thank you. It was founded in 1881 in New York City by Jews to rescue Jews from pogroms in Eastern Europe. In a case of great minds think alike, in the next year, in 1882, HIAS Pennsylvania was founded by Jews to rescue Jews from pogroms in Eastern Europe in Philadelphia. At the time, it was pre-internet, so we didn't know about each other. Ultimately, we did learn about one another. We grew up sort of in parallel and consulted with one another, but we grew in very different directions. HIAS Inc. became a national and international refugee agency. So they have people on the ground, both in Poland and Ukraine, and I believe they have been talking about mobilizing additional folks, possibly to go to Frankfurt. And what they are doing are two things. They're providing resources like blankets and food and that kind of thing. And they're also providing consultation to the 2 million that are fleeing, okay? The additional thing that they do regularly is they liaise with the United States State Department for purposes of managing the American Refugee Resettlement Program. They are one of 9 national agencies that does that. Each of the 9 has affiliates on the ground that engage in the actual work of resettling refugees here in the United States. HIAS Pennsylvania is one of those affiliates on the ground. So one of the programs that we engage in is refugee resettlement. And we stand ready to receive Ukrainians, although we won't be doing that anytime soon, and I'm going to explain why. But we have been resettling Afghans, and we've been resettling refugees from all over the world for a long, long time. In addition to resettlement, however, HIAS Pennsylvania provides immigration legal services to immigrants, low-income immigrants in Pennsylvania. We are one of the largest legal services providers in Pennsylvania, and that's actually the primary activity in which we engage. Our refugee resettlement program is relatively small, and there are other agencies in Philadelphia that are larger than us. So that's the difference between HIAS Inc. and HIAS PA. My co-host Ellen Frida is going to put the website for HIAS Inc. into the chat so that if you want to find out more about what they are doing on the ground, you can access their website. Okay, so now let's talk about what HIAS Pennsylvania is doing and how you can help. There are essentially 3 categories of Ukrainians right now that need help. The first category are Ukrainians that are already here. They were here on temporary visas, otherwise known as non-immigrant visas. They came here either to study or to travel or to visit loved ones. They had every intention of going home, and then Putin invaded and war broke out and they can't go home. As a result, Biden instituted about 2 weeks ago temporary protected status for that category of people. HIAS Pennsylvania is providing legal services to help that category obtain temporary protected status. Now, what does that get you? It gets you the ability to stay in the United States for 18 months. It also gets you the ability to work. What does it not do? You cannot, with temporary protected status, petition for family members who are trying to escape Ukraine. You cannot remain after 18 months unless Biden extends it. You also might have some difficulty traveling outside of the country if you travel outside of the country and then try to get back in. Temporary protected status means exactly what it sounds like. It's temporary. It is a second-class status. It's good for emergencies. It's not good for permanent resettlement, okay? Second category of Ukrainians. There are Ukrainians here that our agency resettled over the last 6 years. And ironically, between 2016 and 2020, the largest number of refugees that our agency resettled were from Ukraine. So this was before the war broke out. These are people that fled Ukraine because of the annexation of Crimea in 2014. They fled, they went to refugee camps, they said that they were refugees and they needed help. The refugee resettlement, the international refugee resettlement system assessed them, agreed that they were refugees, determined that they should be resettled in the United States, sent them through the American security vetting process, cleared them for travel, and then assigned them to HIAS Inc. And then HIAS Inc. assigned them to us, and then we resettled them. So we have resettled a number of Ukrainians through that process. And those Ukrainians now, many of them are green card holders or naturalized citizens. As green card holders and naturalized citizens, they are allowed to file what are called family-based petitions. So for immediate family members defined as spouses, minor unmarried children, or parents, they can file to ask that they be permitted to come to the United States. That's great, and we're helping people do that. The downside is that process is a 3 to 5 year process. Step 1 is what we do. We file the initial paperwork. Step 2 happens at the US Embassy. It's supposed to happen at the US Embassy in Ukraine. The US Embassy in Ukraine has been closed since February 19th. So now the US embassies in Frankfurt, Hungary, and Poland are taking over the processing of those petitions. But for those of you who read the New York Times last weekend, you saw that there were lines around the block, right? So those are lines of people trying to get their petitions processed, and it's a years-long process. So this is not a remedy that's going to help the 2 million people that are fleeing. Nevertheless, we are trying to help as much as we can. The third category are those who are eligible to file something pursuant to the Lautenberg Amendment. The Lautenberg Amendment was a federal law that was passed in response to the Soviet Jewry movement in the 90s. It was meant to rescue Jews from the Soviet Union. Since then, it has been broadened to provide protection to historically persecuted religious minorities, provided that they have relatives here, what's known as a family tie. So if there's a family tie here, and you are from an historically persecuted religious minority, such as Jewish, some minority Christian, some Baha'i, then you can go through the Lautenberg process to petition to come here and be treated like a refugee. That's the good news. The bad news, it takes 3 to 5 years. Why? Because it's the same processing system. We file the petitions here, then you have to go to the US Embassy over there, and then it takes them 3 to 5 years to do all the paperwork. Okay, so we should be hearing a theme by now. The United States is not responsive to humanitarian crises, period, the end. So why are they not being considered refugees and resettled? Well, I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. 1, Europe is taking them in right now, thank goodness. Right? So many refugees are being taken care of by Europe, and we should be grateful, and we should be pressuring our Congress to do our part. 2, though, and this is the big one, even if we said, okay, fine, we're going to take in these refugees, then what happens? Then they go through the security vetting process. The United States has had the most rigorous security vetting process since September 11th, 2001 in the world. The process is an 8 to 10 step process. Every step along the way is time sensitive. So if you get to step 4 and you've cleared steps 1 through 3, and then on step 4, there's some kind of problem with the paperwork, and your clearance at step 2 expires, you have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. Our agency has resettled refugees that were born in a refugee camp, that were raised in a refugee camp, that married in a refugee camp and arrived pregnant with their first child because it took that long. It can take between 10 and 20 years to go through the security vetting process. Why does it take so long? Because all of those processes require staff to enter the information into computers around the world and make the phone calls and talk to Interpol. And right now, there are not sufficient staff, American staff overseas to do all that processing. That's why think lines around the block, right? Okay, so the refugee resettlement process right now, unless there are changes, is not going to work. So what happened in Afghanistan and what's going on now, because this is related, right? We saw 170,000 Afghans airlifted to the United States. How did that happen? Okay, the way that happened is because Afghans were put their own lives in danger by helping the American military, the American government, most importantly, the president and the State Department, decided that we would make an exception to the rule of processing, and we would grant immediate emergency humanitarian parole. And so we granted immediate emergency humanitarian parole to 170,000 people. What that did was grant them entrance into the United States. It did not give them a legal status. They were not allowed to work. They were not allowed to petition for relatives. Okay, they simply were allowed to come into the United States. Then they put them on 5 military bases across the United States. And at the military bases, they deployed hundreds of civilians to engage in that 8-step security vetting process that I just described. They did the 8-step security process. They did it in 30 days instead of 10 years. Why? Because they threw a number of personnel at the military bases to engage in that process really quickly. When they were cleared at the end of 30 days, they got sent to the resettlement agencies across the country. Our agency resettled 110 Afghans. We finished resettling the last Afghan that we had committed to in January. And as of 3 weeks ago, every single one of those Afghans got permanent housing. Yay. That's thanks to our housing case manager. And so now what we're doing is continuing to resettle just refugees from overseas that are cleared for travel, refugees from all over the world, from Eritrea, from Congo, from Syria, from any of the other places that have had meltdowns in the last several years, and which people are fleeing from. So that's where Afghans stand. Now, one of the other things that happened in the chaos of the evacuation is many of the Afghans that were airlifted got separated from their families. Most poignant example from us, and there are many all over the country, is a family that we resettled in September that was separated from their 2-year-old. The 2-year-old was in the arms of a cousin. They were jostling in the airport. Our family got pushed onto a plane, and the cousin that was holding on to the 2-year-old got pushed away, and they landed in the United States without their son. So the first thing they did when we resettled them was said, "Where's our son? Are you going to help us get our son back?" So we tried. So here's what we've been doing. So we went to the State Department. We went to Representative Mary Gay Scanlon, who's our representative. She pulled every plug that she could. The first answer we got is, well, we can't bring the 2-year-old here because he doesn't have a visa. Hello? So we said, well, why don't you grant him humanitarian parole? Oh, that was only for the emergency. That was only for people in August. It's now September. We can't grant humanitarian parole. You have to file a petition. You have to go to a 3 to 5 year process. So we said, that's ridiculous. So then we kept arguing. Then finally they said, okay, fine. We'll give him a visa, but now we can't get him here because he needs a passport. Well, they closed the passport office in Afghanistan in November. The Taliban did. So we said, well, what are you talking about? So luckily Qatar got involved because we raised such a stink and went to the media and everything that the Qatar officials saw the ABC News report got upset and said, okay, I'm going over there. I'm going to get this 2-year-old a passport. So they got him a passport. So then they said, okay, but he's 2 and he can't travel on the plane by himself. So our family said, that's okay. My brother is there. My brother will escort the 2-year-old. So you know what our government said? Oh no, we can't have that because the brother is an adult and he's not allowed in the country. So we can't allow him on the plane. And we can't put the 2-year-old on the plane because he's unaccompanied and he's too young. So that's where we are. So we're still pushing. We're about to do another media story about it because it's so outrageous. But again, not only is delay a theme, exclusion is a theme, right? So this should be sounding familiar to you. So now let's back up one step further to the crisis in Haiti and what's happening with them. How come we haven't heard about Haitian refugees? Okay, we haven't heard about Haitian refugees because they haven't been considered by our government to be refugees. Yes, an earthquake happened and displaced thousands of people. Yes, their president was assassinated and chaos erupted. But, you know, that doesn't quite meet the definition of whether they were politically persecuted or persecuted based on their religion or based on their ethnicity or based on these other grounds for refugee status. So they were not granted refugee status. So Haitians who are closer geographically to our country than others are, made it to South America and then tried to seek asylum in our country. So what happened? Well, President Biden reauthorized the use of Title 42, which is an obscure provision of public health law that allows our government to expel people without a hearing in times of public health crises. So this made sense in March of 2020, right? The world was shutting down. We had no idea what we're facing. It made no sense whatsoever in July of 2021. And in fact, it's the opposite of helping public health, because if we had in fact let in the Haitians and everybody else who was seeking asylum, we could have also vaccinated them, which is really important given that a lot of the people seeking asylum are coming from countries where they don't have access to the vaccine. Instead, what are we doing? We're letting them in, and then we're throwing them out without a hearing where they can wander around without shelter, without healthcare, without vaccines, and go and reinfect thousands of people. So it is the opposite of public health, and yet Title 42 stands. So what are we doing? Haitians are eligible for temporary protected status. You remember in the beginning that I said that Ukrainians are now eligible for temporary protected status. I explained what it was. Haitians, excuse me, that got here before July 1st are eligible for temporary protected status. And so we have been filing petitions on their behalf so that they can temporarily remain here and work, but it is not a permanent status and it doesn't allow them to get their family members out. So what does all of this mean? The final message is that our entire immigration system from the very first law, which is the Chinese Exclusion Act, the very first laws that were passed were based on a foundation of exclusion. All of our immigration law and policy is about excluding people. Anyone that comes in is an exception to that rule. And that's a problem. It's a problem in a time when there are 82 million people, and this doesn't count the 2 million Ukrainians, so it's up to 84 million displaced people around the world. And it's a problem when our country has seen a birth rate decline for more than a decade, a great resignation of the baby boomers who are not being replaced by young people, inflation. These are all connected. So this is a moment when not only does the world need us, but we need the world almost more than they need us. So this doesn't make any sense. So what I'm asking you to do, you want to know how you can help. The biggest, most important thing you can do to help is to call Congress every single day. And we put talking points on our website. I'm going to ask Ellen to put our website in the chat, and it gives you scripts. And all you need to do every morning with your coffee, before you read the paper, call your congressperson and read the script, and do it every single day. It's really, really, really important. The second important thing to do if you speak other languages is volunteer to interpret. We're in desperate need for interpreters because all of these crises happen back to back without giving anybody time to learn English. So we need Creole interpreters, we need Dari and Pashto interpreters, and now we need Ukrainian interpreters. So there's a link on our website that shows you how to volunteer to be an interpreter. And then finally, if you're an attorney, we need you. We need you to take on these TPS cases. We need you to take on the family-based petitions. We need you to file for humanitarian parole and Lautenberg, even though it's going to take 3 to 5 years, but it's better than nothing. And in the meantime, call Congress every single day and ask them to be more responsive to crises, to expedite all of these processes, and to create an immigration law that's about inclusion rather than exclusion. Okay, that was my speech. So now I'm going to open it up for questions. We have 136 people on the call. So I'm thinking that it might avoid some of the chaos to go through the chat. So, and I see that people already have questions. So there is my only question. I completed my FBI and state background checks in December. Haven't heard anything. What do I need to do next to start helping? You need to go to a volunteer orientation. And if you have already attended a volunteer orientation, the sign up is on our website, then you can call or email our community engagement specialist, Annika Kat, and Ellen's going to put her email in the chat.
Yeah, I actually did that already. I did all the orientations and stuff.
Okay, so great. So email Annika and she'll hook you up.
I think Ellen said she was going to have someone get in touch with me tomorrow.
Okay, good, great.
Thank you, Bill.
Great. Okay. All right. And then here's a question. Is there anything which can be done for the persecuted Christians from Pakistan who have applied for asylum and are stuck in the bubble of backlog, completed their asylum interviews, still waiting for decisions from USCIS, which are pending for the last more than almost 6 months? Yeah. So what you could do is call Congress. Seriously, call Congress and tell them to do something about the backlog. The backlog is all about staffing. We have not invested in our infrastructure for processing all of these applications. And so that's what you can do. All right, according to a coalition, Evacuate Our Allies, 200,000 Afghans were left behind in the evacuation. Yes, that's from Judy BB. Thank you very much. Absolutely true. So that 2-year-old, think about him multiplied by 200,000. That's what they're facing. And they're trying to resettle here without their family. Okay, are we, the US, still saying that a person who passes through another country without seeking asylum can't seek asylum? So yes and no. So the third country asylum rule is that if you have been in a country where you can get asylum, the expectation is that you should try to get asylum there. However, Trump extended that policy to include countries like Guatemala, which was never included because it wasn't considered a safe place for one to get asylum. I believe that Biden has rolled that back so that you're not expected to seek asylum in Guatemala, but you are expected to seek asylum in Canada, for example, if that's where you land first. Okay, why are pro bono efforts declining? So that's a good question. And, you know, for the attorneys in the room or friends of attorneys or loved ones of attorneys, the pandemic has been really hard on everybody, including, of course, attorneys. The first thing that happened is right at the shutdown, private attorneys were very worried that about losing money. You know, there were layoffs, there was all kinds of problems because of the feeling that, you know, the courts were closed and you couldn't access legal services. So in response to that, a lot of the larger firms increased tremendously, significantly, the billable hour requirements that their associates had. So suddenly, where associates were already working really hard, now they had to somehow work doubly and triply hard in response to this increase in billable hours, which squeezed out any time they had for pro bono. So that's one problem. The good news in terms of the firms, they did end up doing financially okay, more than okay. They made lots of money. So there was some hope that some of that billable hour requirement would relax a little bit. In fact, it hasn't, because the need has increased with the pandemic. So no law firm who could get paid wants to turn away a paying client who says, look, I need your help. And so the billable hour requirements have remained really high, leaving very little room for attorneys to be able to engage in pro bono. The other thing that's happened is attorneys, like everybody else, you know, some of them have really young kids and their kids are home and they can't concentrate and it's really hard. Some of them are just totally burnt out by everything that's happened and they've quit. They've joined the Great Resignation. Some of them are just struggling with depression or illness, isolation, all the things that we're all struggling with. So it's very, very difficult. I am part of a citywide coalition of other executive directors, and we're going to put on a convening next month that's going to be all about trying to reaffirm our commitment to pro bono. And so we do have some hope that that will make a difference. But that's, you know, the state of where things stand. So if you know private attorneys, give them a hug and tell them to do pro bono. Okay. Will HIAS provide legal training sessions to lawyers to help with the work I outlined? Yes, HIAS PA will provide training sessions, and we already have some trainings recorded and on our website, but we do also provide regular training. So if you sign up to volunteer as a pro bono attorney, you'll go to our volunteer orientation and then we'll sign you up for a training. Okay. And then, sorry, my chat jumped. Are there any special considerations for groups like women, children, LGBTQ people, elderly, disabled, sick, etc.? I know you can apply for asylum under, sorry, my chat is jumping, under some of those categories, but in terms of getting those especially vulnerable groups out of refugee camps, secondary countries. So no, unfortunately. So let me go back over the definition, both of asylum and refugee. You were defined as somebody eligible for asylum or refugee status if you can show that you were persecuted based on one of 5 reasons. So those 5 reasons are religion, politics, race, ethnicity, or belonging to a special social group. So the special social group, in some countries, it's women. In some other countries, it may be LGBTQ, like Uganda.
Tomorrow.
And I'm sorry, Ruth, did you unmuted? So thank you. So those are the categories for getting either refugee or asylum status. You get the refugee status overseas. And if you get given that status, regardless of why, you then are waiting in the camp to go through the security vetting process. If you are seeking asylum, you come here, you file the paperwork. And again, HIAS PA does this on behalf of people who are seeking asylum. You file that paperwork seeking that status. And while you're waiting for the courts, you're just waiting. And it doesn't matter which category you're in. So hopefully that answered your question. Again, the United States is not responsive to crises. So this is why you have to call every single morning with your coffee or your tea. Is there training for lawyers to learn the process for TPS? Yes, that's one of the trainings that we provide. And you just want to sign up to volunteer on our website. What benefits can Afghans be eligible for who came here from the pullout, housing, food, etc.? So that's an interesting question and gets back to the exception versus the rule problem. So remember I told you that in order to airlift the Afghans, the United States gave them humanitarian parole, which is an entry status, not a legal status, an entry visa, not a legal status. So the fact that they had an entry visa, not a legal status, meant that when they first arrived here back in August and September, they weren't eligible for our services, for food stamps, for healthcare, for working, any of that stuff. Obviously, that was a huge problem. So on September 30th, Biden signed a law that rendered Afghan humanitarian parolees who were evacuated in August eligible for all that good stuff, and said that they were temporarily eligible for that, but that they had to file for asylum within, I think it's 6 months or something of landing in order to get permanent eligibility for all of that. Excuse me, just need some water. So that's how it worked for Afghans. Ukrainians, though, remember, they haven't been given anything. And why haven't they been given anything? Because the United States has not made an exception for them, because the rule is that you can't come in. And the reason they made the exception for the Afghans is because the Afghans helped our military. So they also haven't made an exception for Haitians. So, so those people don't even have an entry visa, much less a legal status. Does that answer your question? I know it's very confusing.
Well, I was wondering about the ones in November who were on the last planes out of Kabul.
Out of Afghanistan? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a problem, right? Because the last military planes left in August. The November planes were private charter flights. And so those people don't have access to the same benefits. They have to file for asylum. And again, we're helping them file for asylum, but until they get asylum, they're not eligible for anything. So it's a problem. Okay, next question. I read that some Russians are trying to claim asylum at our southern border. What do I know about that? So what I know, which, you know, take it with a grain of salt, because it's not as if I've been at the border or that I've spoken to any Russians. But the news reports that I heard, my understanding is these are Russians that are protesting Putin's invasion and so are at risk politically. And so they would be eligible under our definitions for asylum. They have to make it across the border and, you know, seek asylum. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, let's see. Most people who pass through a third country, except for Canada, where we have an agreement not to accept those from Canada and vice versa, are now eligible to apply for asylum because Biden ended Trump's policy for those passing through Central America. However, if a person has been in another country for a while and that country offered the person some sort of status, they are considered to be firmly resettled and are therefore generally barred from asylum, offered some sort of permanent status. So yeah, so that's just going back to that earlier question. Judy was confirming what I was saying, that it's no longer the policy that Trump instituted with respect to Central America, but it is an issue if you're in a country where you're offered permanent status. And that very much depends on the country's policy. So it's country by country. It's not our policy, if that makes sense. How can I get the script for calling my congressman? Are there other people we can call? So yes, the script is on our website and Ellen's going to put the information in the chat. And the other people you can call are the president. So the office of the president, which also is on our website, that how you dial and write postcards to the office of the president as well as to Congress. So you should do that. How about Ukrainian family members who have USA family members already in the USA as citizens here? How do we help them? So if you have a personal connection, let's say that a really good friend or neighbor of yours has family in Ukraine and they're very upset, obviously, about what's going on, they may be able, if you're able to collect goods for them, goods meaning diapers, bottled water, blankets, anything like that, and they are able to get them to their family members, then by all means, you should do that. If you don't have that personal connection, but you want to do something like that, go to the National HIAS website, where you can donate money and goods to relief agencies that are overseas.
I was,
Go ahead. Oh no, false alarm. How will we overcome Republican opposition who have made immigration a defining issue of exclusion? So economics. There was an article in the Times not too long ago, I would say 2 weeks ago, that made it very clear from an economics perspective that we are in desperate need for immigrants. The perfect storm that has arisen between the declining birth rate, the aging population, the increase in mortality from gun violence and COVID, all of that perfect storm means that we're desperate. I mean, no joke. We need immigrants. We need immigrants. We need immigrants. We need immigrants. So hit them with economic arguments. If they're not compelled by the humanitarian ones, hit them with the economic ones. Okay, how can I get the script for calling? Oh, I already read that. Sorry. All right. Let's see. Oh, and Phyllis Denbo, thank you so much. She put in the chat our advocacy page. What was the last date to be eligible for TPS for Haitians? So Haitians who got here by July, I want to say 18th. If you Google Haitian TPS, it'll tell you the exact date, but it's like by July 18th, I think, are eligible for TPS. If you got here afterwards, you're not eligible. So this is the other where we're seeing this politics of exclusion, right? Temporary protected status is meant to help people that were already here when chaos erupted overseas. It's not meant to respond to people who are fleeing because chaos erupted. Get it? So I think, so that's a really, really hard thing, but an important question. So you can Google any population that you're trying to help. You can Google Haitian TPS, Ukrainian TPS, Afghan TPS, which was just passed today. And it'll give you the dates before which anyone who is here in the United States before that date are eligible for TPS. Anyone coming after whatever the date is not eligible. Ultimate irony, right? Okay, I am a psychologist trained in trauma-based therapy. I'm interested in volunteering my service. Is there a need for my services? Absolutely, particularly if you speak other languages. So go to our volunteer page, sign up. We'll go through the orientation. We'll see if we can find a good fit for you. We're always looking for more individual trauma resources. The people we serve are really, really traumatized, as you can imagine. Okay, hi, like Robert Gerchev, I've completed all the steps to become a volunteer, including a volunteer session. I signed up for a task in the portal, but haven't gotten any further information. Is there any more I can do? So I would say just write to Annika Cat, whose email is in our, should be in the chat. Annika Cat is our community engagement specialist. She is a miraculous one-woman show, not to be underestimated, but very much overwhelmed. She is in the process of interviewing and hiring an assistant who we hope will join us very soon. But in the meantime, she's a one-woman show and all this stuff has been coming at her. So just email her patiently, kindly, and repeatedly, and she'll get to you. So I am not a lawyer or able to interpret what other volunteer activities are available. So there's lots. There's ESL tutoring, which we train people for. There's medical appointment accompaniment. Everybody that's new to the United States, one of the things we have to do is get them a physical and then some follow-up care. And since it's their first, it happens in the first week that they're here in the United States, we try to set them up with volunteers who will accompany them and teach them how to use the subway and show them where, CHOP and Penn Hospital and Jefferson are. and kind of talk to them a little bit about the healthcare system. We provide an American health system orientation as part of the services that we provide, but it's always helpful to reinforce it through a volunteer. So that's another activity. You can also engage in housing setup. There's a whole long list on our website. So you don't have to be a professional to volunteer. We love volunteers of all shapes and kinds. Okay. Oh, Judy added a good tidbit. There have always been Russians seeking asylum at the border. Judy met them in 2020. For those of you who don't know, Judy Bernstein-Baker is the former executive director of HIAS PA, a mentor of mine. She was here for 18 years. She is a force to be reckoned with. And what she immediately did upon retirement is take on like 40 additional asylum cases. So, and she also took a border trip. So there are more Russians seeking asylum now than there were then because of the war. It's up to Customs and Border Protection as to whether these asylum applicants are going to be let in or will be turned back and forced to remain in Mexico. We're not hearing most Russians are being admitted, but they are immediately placed in removal proceedings where they have to go to immigration court and ask the immigration judge for asylum showing proof of persecution. Okay. Okay, you mentioned those that were in the US when war broke out and would be granted an emergency status for 18 months. That's temporary protected status. They are legal to remain for 18 months and can work. Question, do they receive a social security number or an ITIN number? So that's a good question. They receive an ITIN number because it's temporary. And yeah, so ITIN is individual tax identification.
Actually, they can.
And they do get a social security number.
But a special social security
Special, right.
card.
Right, a special
restricted.
temporary. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. And I think those are all the questions that were in the chat.
You know what?
Go ahead.
Are we participating verbally, or is that okay?
Go ahead, Judy. Yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so one of the issues that I think is coming up more than usual is with all these people applying for TPS, including Ukrainians and Afghans, they're not really, only a small number of them are eligible for medical assistance, even though they're very low income. Only pregnant women and children are eligible for medical assistance. And so this seems to me an advocacy issue at both the federal and state level, because we're going to see a lot of people now on TPS who are war victims and have no other resources, and trying to enlarge the rules for medical assistance for people on temporary protected status who are low income and not working is quite important, especially for the elderly. So I'm just putting that on the table because I'm getting a lot of calls.
No, Judy, I'm so glad that you presented that, because it raises, again, it's another example, the part of the policy behind limiting it so severely and saying like, okay, you're not eligible for medical assistance is because in the government's mind, they're still operating in, I don't know, La La Land or 1950, saying, you know, well, you're getting work authorization, so you'll get a job and then you'll be able to get health insurance with your job. Well, welcome to the, you know, what are we in the 21st century? I mean, health insurance doesn't come with a lot of jobs. There's Obamacare, so you could get subsidized insurance in some case, but some of the wages are so low that you can't even afford that. There's also the navigator problem, right? A lot of people who don't realize that they might be eligible for Obamacare. So, so there's just a lot of issues with a policy that's based on exclusion, that's based on, you know, you have to be wealthy, you have to be self-sustaining. Humanitarian parole itself, the entry visa that the Afghans got, that Ukrainians could get, except again, it's a 3 to 5 year process. In order to file for humanitarian parole, you have to prove that you won't become a public charge. So what is this? A humanitarian remedy for wealthy people? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. If you're fleeing with the clothes on your back, of course you can't support yourself and you can't prove that you can support yourself. So it doesn't, our policies don't make any sense for the current world, and they certainly don't make sense for American needs, which is again what you want to stress with those who aren't already persuaded. So somebody asked me, where are you going to find this recording once the meeting is completed? On our website, there's a drop down for news and views. And so you'll find it there. It will likely be posted tomorrow or Friday at the latest. Do you need volunteer Portuguese translators? Yes, but not as frequently, but we still need them. So if you speak it, please sign up. Okay, we still have 15 minutes. Amazing. You can tell I was raised in New York because I speak really quickly. And so now those of you that missed half of what I said, raise your hand and I'll say it again. Will there be a transcript or just a recording? Just a recording. Okay. So I guess I do want to leave you with a positive note and not feeling despairing, which is why I'm saying that advocacy is so important, even though it can feel so overwhelming. So I love to tell this story. It's one of my favorite stories about advocacy and action. So some of you may recall in 2016, Trump won the election and the Republicans won Congress. So we had a unified political party government, and they were hell-bent on destroying the ACA, right? Obamacare. So there was a groundswell across the country to try to prevent this from happening. And the Republicans were determined to get something on Trump's desk before the July 4th recess that would have eliminated Obamacare. And so advocates across the country got together and flooded Congress with calls, and flooded, tied up their phone lines, tied up their fax lines, sent postcards, any manner of what have you to say, don't mess with our healthcare. It was such a strong response that the 100% Republican government could not do it. They realized that the public was not on their side, and they backed down and they went away for July 4th, and it came off the table. So it works, but the problem is it only works in high volumes. So that's why you got to do it every morning. Every morning, make your coffee, make your phone call, read the paper. That's your new routine. Okay. All right. What is the office or agency in Washington that's responsible for all the immigration related requirements, activities, decisions, etc.? Would that there was one. There isn't one. There are several federal agencies that deal with immigration law and policy. The first and foremost, you have to understand that unlike other civil litigation, it's in the executive. It's not in the judicial, so President Biden has, at the end of the day, all the power. That's why Trump was able to do so much damage by executive order. So it's him first and foremost. Then you have the State Department. Then you have the Department of Justice, under which there's the Office of Immigrant Review, the Executive Office of Immigrant Review, EOIR, and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. So these are all federal agencies. They come under the Department of Justice, as well as the Department of Homeland Security. So it's a very confusing and not transparent process, which is another reason why I need you all to call every single morning and just flood Congress, because what will happen is Congress will say, oh my God, all these people are making me crazy. And then they'll go to the president and they'll say, we have to do something about this. We have to form a commission. We have to do something because my phone is ringing off the hook. Is it unrealistic to expect them to know what each other is doing or cooperate on a routine basis? Yeah, pretty much. You know, there is some cooperation, there is some knowledge, but you know, these are big federal agencies. So like any kind of big bureaucracy, things get lost and there's miscommunication. Okay. Other questions? I've stunned you all into silence. I probably should have written a little pledge card. I pledge to call every single morning. Is there any special status for Ukrainian individuals with family already US citizens because of war? So, no, there's no special status. There is the pathway that I outlined of family-based petitions, humanitarian parole, which is an entry visa, and the Lautenberg petitions. Each of those pathways can be used and have different advantages and disadvantages, and American citizens with Ukrainians abroad who want to hear about that can call us and we'll give them information and advice. But all of them are 3 to 5 year processes. So they're not responded. They're not responsive, excuse me. Is HIAS PA open to working with like-minded organizations? How should one representing another agency or company get in touch with HIAS PA regarding any project or initiative ideas? You can get in touch with me. Of course, we collaborate all the time. We're happy to collaborate. We welcome that. So you're welcome to contact me. I'm going to put my email address in the chat, although just note, I get inundated with email. So I'm also going to put my assistant's email address in the chat so that if I don't respond, you can circle back to her, or you can nag me and send me about 10 emails. By the 10th email, I promise I will notice, and I apologize in advance. But one thing about collaborations, so if you can, if you're talking about relief efforts overseas, the agency you want to collaborate with is HIAS National. If you're talking about relief efforts here, then you can contact me. So hopefully that makes sense. So the other thing I want to just talk to you about is money, because you know, I know people have been very kind and generous to us and to our clients and given us money. We always need more money. But to be clear about it, so the reason we need money and what we use your dollars for is being able to be responsive to crises like these. So when gifts are restricted, you know, to things like, you know, Afghan humanitarian parole, Ukrainian to TPS, it gives less value for the dollar, because then we have to account that gift goes to that person. And the reality is what we've seen in the last 6 months is 3 back-to-back displacement crises on top of the largest number of displaced people that have ever been. And we project and are trying to prepare for the fact that we think this is only the beginning of devastating displacement that's going to continue because of climate change. So if you are moved to give, I hope you'll give unrestricted dollars, because that gives us the best ability to be flexible and pivot depending on the disaster du jour. So hopefully I've made that clear. Can you send us ways to detect fraud in Airbnb payments? Not fraud on Airbnb's part, but anyone impersonating Airbnb. I joined late, so sorry if this was already addressed. So no, I'm not aware of any particular schemes related to Airbnb. I will say there's been a huge uptick in fraud by email for a number of different things. I've seen it myself. I get a ton of emails from you know, insurance companies that I don't think are insurance companies. The way to really protect yourself is, first of all, don't open the email if it's unfamiliar to you. Second of all, take a look, which you can usually do without opening. Take a look at the address that it's coming from. If the address is .com or .org or .gov, and it's supposed to be a government agency, it's only should be .gov. If it's supposed to be a nonprofit, it should only be .org. And if it's supposed to be a company, it can be .com, but it shouldn't be like bnb.com Cyrillic lettering. That's the first tip off that it's fake. And so look closely at the email addresses that you're getting. Okay. Other questions? 6:26, we have 4 minutes. You're very welcome. I hope I was able to answer all your questions. And I'm sorry if that was a lot of information really quickly. Oh, it looks like there was one more question. I'm a college professor. We've been trying to get F1 visas for students. Okay, so that, I'm glad you asked that question. So student visas are not something that HIAS PA does, but there are a number of private attorneys that do help universities as well as students to get the students. So I would suggest, one of them I'm pretty sure is on this call, Wendy Hess, Emily Cohen. These are all board members of ours. If you want information on how to find attorneys who will engage in this, you should feel free to email me and I'll try to give you some referral resources. Okay. Oh, please continue these briefings on a monthly basis. Okay, well, your wish is my command. All right. Okay, wonderful. All right, and when you're thinking about it, send me an email about how your multiple conversations to legislators went. Or post it on Facebook, share, tell them, oh, I was making my daily congressional phone call about immigration, and this is what I heard. Post it on Facebook. That's my challenge to you. Yes, Phyllis.
A question about phone calls. You call the congressman's office and you get some lower level staff, and I never even know whether it goes any further than that. How do we get through?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So it is always lower level staff, which is really frustrating. However, here's what I swear to you, I promise this is what they're doing. Every single legislator has staffers who have a tracking sheet and they make a check mark: immigration, taxes, healthcare. So the idea is you want them to have so many check marks about immigration that they can't turn away from it. So it's okay that you got a low level staffer. They are writing down the check mark. Okay, somebody called about immigration reform. So it's still really important.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Oh, so my email and assistant's email are in the chat. If you want to, does everybody know how to save the chat? If you save the chat, then you can kind of scroll through and find it.
Now, how do you save it?
The 3 dots on the right.
Yeah.
If you click them and at the top, it says save chat.
Okay.
And then at your leisure, you can find it.
Kathy, I was on a phone call, a phone until I got home and then got on here. So I don't have any of the chat from while I was listening on the phone. Is there a way that the only chat I have is started like at 6? Because for the first half hour, there's...
Yeah, so we'll save the chat and we will try to scroll through it and like turn it into Q&A, right? Which we'll post near the recording. That'll take us a little bit longer. It'll probably take us till next week, but we'll put the recording up right away and then look again and we'll have a prettied up version of the chat. Okay?
Yeah, what would be helpful is all the links you were talking about.
Right, exactly.
The questions are answered in the recording.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. All right, it's 6:30. We did it. Woo! It's hot here. I don't know about there. I had a lovely jacket, but it was too hot.
Thanks very much.
Very helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so
you,
much, ma'am.
Matt.
Thank you so much. It's really, really
Thanks.
informative, ma'am. God bless
Oh,
you.
good.
God
I'm
bless you, ma'am.
glad. God bless you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kat.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.